I sent my girlfriend flowers anonymously. I recently sent my girlfriend a box of flowers anonymously. Honestly, I'm not sure what compelled me to do it. Maybe it was a mix of wanting to surprise her and test the waters of her reaction. Whatever the case, I wasn't prepared for the chain of events that followed. Let me take you through it all, step by step, because I'm still trying to piece everything together myself. First, some background. I'm 28, and she's 27. We've been dating on and off for about 5 years. Things between us weren't always stable, but in 2022, we finally got serious. Our relationship became exclusive, and we even started discussing moving in together. Despite our rocky past, I thought we were on solid ground now. 2023 was tough for both of us. Individually, we faced personal struggles and financial challenges. It was a draining year, but through it all, I believed we were a team. Our relationship seemed fine, or at least, I thought it was. Looking back now, I'm starting to question if I missed some signs along the way. The flowers were a spontaneous idea. I didn't put much thought into it other than wanting to do something sweet for her. I decided to send them anonymously, thinking it would be a fun little surprise. I didn't include a note, partly because I thought she'd know they were from me. After all, who else would send her flowers out of the blue? On the day they were delivered, the flower shop called to confirm the time. They said they'd be dropping them off at her apartment within the hour. That's when I got the idea to pick up her favorite breakfast and surprise her in person. It felt like the perfect way to start her day: flowers, breakfast, and a little quality time together. As I approached her apartment, I called her to let her know I was outside. That's when the first red flag appeared. She didn't pick up. Instead, she texted me, saying she was on the phone handling something and would call me back. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe she was genuinely busy. But after waiting about 10 to 15 minutes with no call back, I started to feel uneasy. I texted her again, letting her know I had brought her breakfast and was waiting outside. She read the message almost immediately, but didn't reply. A few more minutes passed before she finally called me back. Her tone was casual as she said she'd come down to meet me. When she came outside, she greeted me with a hug, like she always does, but something felt off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at the time, but there was a strange energy about her, a mix of nervousness and distraction. We went upstairs to her apartment, and that's when I noticed the flowers were nowhere in sight. At first, I thought maybe she hadn't seen them yet, but that didn't make sense. The delivery had been confirmed, and enough time had passed for her to notice them. Instead of asking about the flowers, I decided to wait and see if she'd bring them up. Her behavior grew even stranger once we were inside. She guided me straight to the couch and seemed unusually determined to keep me there. Anytime I tried to get up or move around her apartment, she'd find a reason to stop me. She kept asking if I wanted water or snacks and insisted on bringing them to me. It was almost like she didn't want me wandering around. What really caught my attention, though, was how glued she was to her phone. She was texting nonstop, barely looking up at me. She seemed tense, like something was bothering her. At one point, I asked if everything was okay, and she brushed it off, saying she was just dealing with some work stuff. Her explanation didn't sit right with me, but I decided not to press her on it. I didn't stay long. I told her I had come by to drop off breakfast and needed to take care of some errands. She didn't try to stop me or suggest that I stay longer. In fact, she seemed almost relieved when I left. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Her reaction to the flowers, or lack thereof, was bothering me the most. If she had received them, why didn't she mention them? And if she hadn't, where were they? Curiosity got the better of me. I decided to call the flower shop and ask if the delivery had been completed. The shop confirmed the flowers had been delivered and even described the person who had received them, a woman who matched my girlfriend's description. This only deepened the mystery. Over the next few days, her behavior didn't improve. She was more distant than usual, replying to my messages with short, curt answers and rarely initiating conversations. When we did talk, she seemed preoccupied, as if her mind was somewhere else. I couldn't help but wonder if the flowers had something to do with it. A week later, I decided to bring up the topic during one of our phone calls. I casually asked if she had received anything unusual recently, like a surprise delivery. There was a brief pause before she answered, "No, why?" Her tone was neutral, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. It felt rehearsed, like she had prepared herself for the question. "Oh, I just thought someone might have sent you something nice," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. She laughed nervously and said, "Nope, nothing like that." Her denial didn't make sense. If the flowers had been delivered to her, why would she lie about it? And if they hadn't, where were they? The whole situation was starting to feel like a puzzle with missing pieces. As the days went by, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started paying closer attention to her behavior, looking for any clues that might explain what was going on. That's when I noticed she was spending more time away from home, often giving vague explanations about where she was going and who she was with. When I asked her directly, she'd dismiss my questions, saying things like, "just running errands," or "meeting up with a friend." One evening, I decided to stop by her apartment unannounced. I'd never done that before, but my gut was telling me something wasn't right. When I arrived, her car was in the parking lot, but she didn't answer the door. I called her, and after a few rings, she finally picked up. She sounded surprised to hear from me and claimed she wasn't home, even though her car was parked right outside. "I just stepped out to grab something," she said, her voice tinged with nervousness. I asked her when she'd be back, and she quickly changed the subject, saying she'd call me later. By this point, my suspicions were at an all-time high. I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I logged into her social media accounts. We'd exchanged passwords years ago, back when we were trying to rebuild trust after one of our breakups. I'd never used them before, but desperate times called for desperate measures. What I found confirmed my worst fears. There were messages between her and another guy, someone I didn't recognize. Their conversations were flirty, filled with inside jokes and plans to meet up. The most recent message was from the day I had sent the flowers. It said, "Thanks for the flowers. They're beautiful." My heart sank. She had assumed the flowers were from him. That's why she didn't mention them to me. That's why she'd been acting so strange. She thought someone else had sent them, and she was happy about it. I didn't confront her right away. I needed time to process everything. The betrayal stung, not just because she was talking to someone else, but because she'd been lying to my face for weeks. I replayed every interaction in my head, wondering how I could have missed the signs. When I finally did confront her, she didn't deny it. She admitted she'd been seeing someone else on the side, claiming she'd been unhappy in our relationship for months, but didn't know how to tell me. Her excuses didn't matter. The damage was already done. I walked away that day, leaving behind 5 years of memories and a future I thought we were building together. It wasn't easy, but I knew I deserved better. Looking back, the flowers were a blessing in disguise. They revealed the truth, even if it wasn't what I wanted to see. As painful as the experience was, it taught me an important lesson. Trust your instincts and never ignore the red flags. Sometimes, the signs are there all along, you just have to be willing to see them. Over the next few days, I kept waiting for her to mention the flowers, but she didn't. Everything seemed normal between us. We texted and talked as usual, and she didn't show any signs of anything being wrong. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was a nagging thought I couldn't ignore. Every time I glanced at my phone, hoping for a message or a comment about the flowers, I was met with silence on the subject. I told myself I was overthinking. Maybe she'd received them, smiled to herself, and simply forgotten to bring it up. Yet, no matter how much I rationalized it, doubt crept into my mind like an unwelcome guest. Then came New Year's Eve. We were at a party together, celebrating with friends. The atmosphere was lively, with music thumping in the background and laughter echoing through the room. For a while, I let myself relax, enjoying the moment and pushing my doubts to the back of my mind. We mingled with others, clinked glasses of champagne, and shared stolen glances that reminded me of why I'd fallen for her in the first place. In the middle of a conversation about something completely unrelated, she suddenly turned to me and asked, "By the way, did you send me flowers the other day?" Her question caught me off guard. For a moment, I was stunned, unsure how to respond. Then I quickly said yes, my voice a little more defensive than I intended. She replied, "Oh, they didn't have a note. Why didn't you tell me?" I explained that it was a spur-of-the-moment decision and that I'd kind of forgotten about it. She nodded and seemed satisfied with my answer, flashing me a small smile before taking another sip of her drink. Our conversation shifted to other topics, and soon we were counting down the seconds to midnight. The rest of the night was uneventful, and I tried to push my lingering doubts to the back of my mind. But her question lingered, replaying in my head. Why did it take her days to ask about the flowers? And why did she seem so casual about it? The next day, I visited her apartment again. This time, the flowers were there, prominently displayed on her living room table. A vase full of vibrant blooms stood as a centerpiece, and for a moment, I felt a small sense of relief. At least she had appreciated them enough to give them a place of honor. I casually mentioned that I hadn't seen them the last time I was there. She paused for a moment, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place, before claiming that they hadn't been delivered yet when I visited. Her response hit me like a ton of bricks. I knew for a fact that was a lie. The flowers had been delivered before I arrived that day. I'd received the delivery confirmation hours earlier. So why would she lie about it? My stomach churned as I tried to mask my reaction. I nodded along, pretending to accept her explanation, but inside, my mind was racing. Why would she hide the flowers initially? Was it possible she thought they were from someone else? The thought made my chest tighten. If there was someone else in the picture, wouldn't she have said something by now? Or was she trying to keep something from me? Over the next few days, I found myself spiraling into a whirlwind of overthinking. Every moment we spent together felt like a riddle I couldn't solve. I analyzed her tone, her body language, and even the way she texted me. Was she pulling away? Or was I just projecting my insecurities onto her? It was exhausting, but I couldn't stop. The flowers were supposed to be a simple, romantic gesture. Instead, they had become a symbol of doubt, a seed of suspicion that grew with each passing day. I tried to convince myself there was a logical explanation for her behavior. Maybe she was distracted that day, Or maybe she'd forgotten the details of the delivery. But the lie about when the flowers arrived felt too specific to ignore. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replayed the sequence of events yet again. The nervousness she'd shown when I first visited her apartment, the delayed acknowledgement of the flowers, and now this blatant lie, they all pointed to something being off. But what? The question gnawed at me. A part of me considered confronting her directly. I imagined how the conversation would go. I'd ask why she lied, and she'd have a perfectly reasonable explanation that would put my mind at ease. But another part of me feared the worst. What if my suspicions were valid? What if she'd thought the flowers were from another man? Or worse, what if they had been from someone else and she was trying to cover it up? Still, confronting her felt like stepping into uncharted territory. I didn't want to come across as paranoid or accusatory, especially if I was wrong. Our relationship had always been built on trust, and this lingering doubt felt like a betrayal of that foundation. But how could I move forward without answers? In the days that followed, I tried to act normal. We went out for dinner, watched movies together, and even planned a weekend getaway. On the surface, everything seemed fine. She laughed at my jokes, held my hand, and kissed me goodnight. But underneath it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The flowers stayed on her table, a constant reminder of my unresolved questions. Each time I saw them, I felt a pang of unease. I started paying closer attention to her actions, looking for signs of anything unusual. Did she seem more secretive than usual? Was she spending more time on her phone? Was I imagining the moments when she seemed distant? One evening, I noticed her phone buzzing repeatedly on the coffee table. She glanced at it quickly before turning it face down. It could have been nothing, but in my hypervigilant state, it felt significant. I wanted to ask who was texting her, but I held back. I didn't want to sound jealous or controlling. Instead, I tried to focus on the good moments. When she laughed at one of my stupid jokes or rested her head on my shoulder during a movie, I told myself that everything was fine. Maybe I was reading too much into the situation. Maybe the lie about the flowers didn't mean anything. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself, the doubt lingered. Finally, after days of internal conflict, I decided I couldn't live in limbo anymore. If I wanted peace of mind, I had to address the situation head-on. One evening, as we sat on her couch sharing a bottle of wine, I mustered the courage to bring it up. "Can I ask you something?" I said, trying to sound casual. She looked up at me, her expression curious. "Of course. What's on your mind?" I hesitated for a moment, choosing my words carefully. "It's about the flowers. When I mentioned not seeing them the first time I visited, you said they hadn't been delivered yet, but I know they had. I got the delivery confirmation earlier that day." Her face froze for a moment, and I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, panic, guilt, or maybe just surprise. She opened her mouth to speak but hesitated, as if trying to decide what to say. She began, her voice faltering. "I didn't mean to lie. I don't know why I said that. Maybe I was caught off guard or didn't know how to explain myself." "Explain what?" I pressed gently, my heart pounding. She took a deep breath, looking down at her hands. "When I first saw the flowers, I thought they might have been from someone else. An old friend I hadn't heard from in a while. But when I realized they were from you, I felt silly for thinking that and didn't know how to bring it up." Her words hit me like a wave, a mix of relief and confusion washing over me. On one hand, her explanation made sense. On the other, it raised more questions. Why would she assume the flowers were from someone else? And who was this old friend she'd mentioned? Why would you think they were from someone else? I asked, trying to keep my tone even. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. It's complicated. He's someone I used to be close with, but it's been years since we've talked. I don't know. I guess I just panicked. It's stupid, I know. Her explanation felt incomplete, but I decided not to push further. Maybe she was telling the truth, or maybe there was more to the story. Either way, I realized that my own insecurities had played a big role in blowing this situation out of proportion. If I wanted our relationship to work, I needed to address those feelings within myself. I believe you, I said finally, reaching for her hand. But if something's ever bothering you, or if there's something I need to know, I hope you'll tell me. She nodded, giving me a small smile. I will. And I'm sorry for making you feel like you couldn't trust me. That wasn't my intention. As we sat there, holding hands, I felt a sense of relief. The doubt hadn't completely disappeared, but it no longer felt like an insurmountable obstacle. I realized that trust wasn't just about expecting the other person to be perfect. It was about being willing to have difficult conversations and work through uncertainties together. The flowers had sparked a storm of questions and fears, but they had also forced us to confront the cracks in our communication. In the end, maybe that was their true purpose, not to create doubt, but to bring us closer together.